Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander the rain-slicked streets of Victorian England, where the air smells faintly of coal smoke and rose water, and the art of falling in love is wrapped in more rules than a tax form. You'll find yourself stepping carefully along cobblestone alleys lit by flickering gaslight, your boots squeaking and gloves spotless. People pass with only the barest nods. Eye contact here is practically a marriage proposal. You spot someone across the room, maybe in a drawing room, maybe just passing by Hyde Park, and instead of swiping right, you flick your fan or subtly tilt your parasol. Congratulations, you've just flirted. But don't get too comfortable, because if you think this is romantic, you probably won't survive what's coming next. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Always love knowing where my fellow night owls are tuning in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly through a foggy evening on a London street. The gas lamps sputter softly overhead, their dim glow stretching shadows across the cobblestones. Horse-drawn carriages clatter in the distance, and a few silhouettes pass, cloaked and silent. It's the 1860s, and you're out for a stroll, accompanied, of course, because no self-respecting young lady or gentleman would dare be alone in public without suitable protection. And no, a large bonnet doesn't count. You've dressed appropriately. That means stiff collar, stiff posture, and emotions kept firmly under wraps. Victorian dating is a game of signals, muted, coded, and designed to confuse everyone but the very observant. Take gloves, for instance. Wearing them is essential. Removing them? Well, now that's scandalous. A gloved handshake? Perfectly fine. A bare-handed touch? Practically an elopement. Across the street, you spot someone. They're with their family, of course. You do your best not to look directly at them, but they seem to be glancing your way. Or are they just admiring the floral arrangement in the shop window? Historians still argue whether some of these subtle gestures were intentional flirtation or simply accidental eyebrow twitches. The Victorians loved rules, endless, fussy rules. And when it came to courtship, the playbook was thicker than Dickens. For instance, you could only stroll with someone of the opposite sex under very specific conditions. Parks like Kensington Gardens became hotbeds of romance, not because people were throwing themselves at one another under the trees, but because you could finally walk beside someone and maybe, just maybe, talk about the weather without causing a scandal. Now imagine trying to flirt while trussed up like a roast. Ladies' dresses included layers of petticoats, corsets tightened to barely breathing levels, and elaborate bonnets that created a sort of privacy bubble around the head. Gentlemen fared only slightly better. Starched shirts, heavy coats, and top hats that practically required their own valet. You walk past a tea shop, and behind the steamed-up glass, two young people sit opposite each other, with a chaperone knitting furiously beside them. The chaperone coughs every time conversation gets remotely interesting. You feel a pang of sympathy. This is romance in the Victorian age, squeezed between lace curtains and societal expectations, served with weak tea and passive-aggressive glances. But here's the thing. Despite, or perhaps because of, all these restrictions, there's a kind of delicious tension to it all. A sideways glance meant everything. A handkerchief dropped could open the door to a dance, a letter, even a proposal. Just don't get too excited. Dropping that hanky was step one of about 67. It's easy to assume Victorians were all buttoned up and emotionally frozen. But that's not quite true. They felt deeply, longed passionately, and often fell in love hard. They just had to do it quietly, preferably behind a doily. One popular flirting tool was the handheld fan. Yes, the delicate thing you wave around when it's slightly warm. That was a secret code book. Open it wide. I'm available. Snap it shut. I'm furious. Rest it on your heart. You've stolen mine. Modern dating apps have nothing on this level of cryptic communication. Imagine trying to signal your interest during a Tinder date by strategically twirling your straw. You step into a quieter alley, the gaslights now casting golden halos above your head. Somewhere nearby, a piano plays a waltz, probably someone practicing in a parlor. Music, too, was part of the courtship ritual. If you were lucky, you might share a duet at a gathering. Just don't get too caught up in the melody. Holding a note too long was fine. Holding a gaze too long, social suicide. It's also worth noting that respectability was everything. One false move could ruin not just a romantic prospect, but your entire reputation. A whispered rumor, a misplaced glove, or God forbid, a laugh that was too loud could brand you fast. And being fast was not a compliment. It meant you were morally slippery, possibly French. But some people bent the rules. There were always rebels. The bold young lady who flirted with her fan in the wrong direction. The brooding poet who wrote scandalous verse about his forbidden love. They usually ended up either ostracized or wildly famous posthumously. You finally reach a small square where couples promenade under the eye of every passing aunt, uncle, and potential in-law. It's not freedom, exactly, but it's something. You can walk beside someone. You can discuss the weather. You might even exchange a laugh. And in Victorian England, that's practically a proposal. Still, as you head home, you wonder how anyone actually managed to fall in love like this. With all these restrictions, it seems impossible. But that's the curious magic of it. When everything is forbidden, even a single look can set your heart racing. You reach your door, the key turning in the lock with a soft click. Behind you, the gas lights flicker, the fog creeps low, and across the street, someone stands still just a moment too long, watching. You barely get your gloves off before a calling card arrives. It's delicately printed, ivory-colored, with a faint scent of lavender. No message, just a name. Mr. Jonathan A. Everly, S-Cake, and a neat embossment around the edges. You don't know him yet, but his name has already passed through the grapevine of your aunt's sewing circle, which might as well be MI5. He is, allegedly, respectable, well-read, and not prone to scandalous mustache styles. That's more than most can say. You tuck the card into the silver tray on the hallway table, where it joins a small army of hopeful suitors, business acquaintances, and that one clergyman who keeps showing up uninvited. The tray is more than just decorative. It's your social scoreboard. And in this game, you're not even allowed to pick up a pen without 3 layers of permission. See, in Victorian society, people didn't just hang out, they called. And not the fun kind of call where you lounge on a sofa with a hot drink and gossip about your ex. No, you make a call by physically showing up at someone's house during a precise 2-hour window and leaving a card. If they return the call, by also leaving their card at your house, you may be permitted to speak. eventually, under strict supervision. This, apparently, is how love begins. You step into the parlor, where the furniture is stiff, the conversation stiffer, and the air smells faintly of boiled cabbage and perfume. This is the battleground of Victorian courtship, the drawing room. It's where you sit, ankles crossed, hands folded, spine like a soldier's, and try to charm without alarming. You're expected to be witty, but not clever, modest, but not dull, engaging, but not forward. Basically, you're supposed to be a human-shaped puzzle box with no visible moving parts. Across from you, your chaperone sits with terrifying stillness, her knitting needles clicking in a rhythm that feels vaguely accusatory. A visiting suitor fidgets in his chair, probably wondering whether he's allowed to compliment your embroidery without being mistaken for a libertine. Calling hours, sometimes referred to as at-home days, are a delicate ritual. Families usually designate 1 or 2 afternoons a week where they're officially at home to receive visitors. Drop by outside those hours? You might as well have proposed marriage or started a fire. For women, these moments are more than social pleasantries. They are a limited chance to observe and be observed. A single visit can determine whether a potential match is encouraged, politely deflected, or sent packing. And what about people you don't want calling? Easy. You simply have the maid say you're not home, even if you're sitting in full view of the window, sipping tea and knitting aggressively. Social lying was practically a national pastime. Now, if the suitor passes this round of vetting by not mentioning politics, horses, or the Boer War too often, then and only then may things proceed. What proceeding means is ambiguous at best. Perhaps an invitation to another parlor, maybe a public outing, with a chaperone, or the highest honor of all, a family dinner where your father silently sizes the poor man up between bites of mutton. This tightly controlled dance isn't limited to the upper class. Middle-class families also follow calling traditions, often with even more scrutiny, because one wrong match could mean slipping back down the social ladder. Reputation, marriageability, and propriety are like porcelain. Beautiful, delicate, and liable to shatter if you so much as breathe on them wrong. One strange, and often overlooked, element of this ritual is the calling card itself. More than just a name, it's a statement. The font, thickness, and even scent mattered. Gentlemen might fold a corner to signify a personal visit. Some left cards on silver trays with slightly bent edges to suggest intimacy. In rare cases, secret messages were encoded in the card's condition, an early form of stealth texting. You receive another card that afternoon, this one with a gold border. That's a no-no. Only nobility or clergy get gilded cards. You make a mental note. Try not to fall for that one. The day winds on, and you find yourself sitting through another acceptable interaction with another gentleman, this one extremely fond of his new pocket watch. You discuss the weather, safe, poetry, borderline, and whether tea made in copper kettles tastes better than iron, shockingly divisive. The man quotes Byron, poorly. Your chaperone's knitting gains speed. Still, there's something oddly comforting in the structure of it all. In a world that often feels chaotic, what with industrial smog, poor sanitation, and the occasional uprising, this routine offers a strange sort of order. Everyone knows the rules, or at least pretends to. And for those who know how to navigate it, courtship becomes its own kind of performance art. But of course, not everyone follows the rules. There were always fast families who ignored the 2-hour rule, who allowed young people to gasp play parlor games like charades and consequences. Games which, according to one particularly prudish etiquette guide, encouraged an excess of frivolity and suggestive proximity. You once played charades at a neighbor's gathering and were told afterward it was bracingly inappropriate. You'd merely acted out rowing a boat. Apparently, the way you mimed the oar was indecent. Historians still argue whether this entire ritual empowered women through social control or simply limited their agency by stuffing it into a lace-trimmed cage. There's evidence on both sides. Calling hours gave women a public voice and visibility, but only within very narrow lanes. As evening falls, you help your maid collect the day's cards. You sort them into piles. Respectable, dull, potentially interesting, and what were they thinking? You place Mr. Everleigh's on top of the maybe stack. He wasn't too loud. His cravat wasn't ridiculous. He didn't mention cricket. Hope flickers. Outside, the gaslights flicker on again, and another evening of careful orchestration begins. Somewhere out there, a suitor is selecting his finest gloves and rehearsing a charming anecdote about his cousin's dog. You'll listen politely. You'll smile just so. And tomorrow, you might leave a card of your own, just folded enough to imply you're still paying attention. You're halfway down the grand staircase when you hear it. The unmistakable clack of knitting needles. Chaperone alert. You round the corner into the parlor, and there she is. Great Aunt Margaret, Victorian courtship's most immovable object. Dressed in 6 layers of black bombazine and suspiciously silent, she gives you a look that suggests your neckline is half an inch too enthusiastic. You glance down. It isn't. But it doesn't matter. In her eyes, you are one mischievous grin away from social ruin. Chaperones are everywhere. Every step you take in this delicate dance of romance comes with a spectator, usually a blood relative, armed with strict morals, a knitting project, and a supernatural ability to sniff out impropriety. A chaperone's role is to guard your reputation like a loyal terrier, only with more judgment and less tail wagging. You settle onto the floral sofa, posture straight. Across from you sits a promising suitor, Mr. Edward Finch, owner of 2 waistcoats and, allegedly, a dairy. His mustache twitches nervously as he compliments the wallpaper. You try not to smile too much. Aunt Margaret does not approve of visible teeth. The chaperone doesn't speak unless addressed. She's just there, breathing, looming. She'll let you talk about safe things, the weather, church sermons, your opinion on marmalade versus jam. Anything more suggestive than crumpets? Out of bounds. If Edward accidentally says leg instead of limb, he's out the door and you'll be banned from butter for a week. This omnipresent third wheel is a fixture of Victorian dating life, especially for upper and middle class young ladies. Privacy is the enemy. You are never alone. Letters are monitored. Outings are chaperoned. And if someone dares suggest a moonlit walk without supervision, they might as well propose on the spot or prepare for scandal. There's a prevailing fear, you see, that left alone, 2 young people might speak honestly, or worse, develop feelings outside the scope of familial approval. Can't have that. The role of the chaperone is to maintain structure, keep everything proper, and prevent what Victorian society coyly referred to as compromising situations. You know, like sitting too close on a settee or laughing too freely at someone's pun. And yet, strangely, this system wasn't purely oppressive. it could be wielded strategically. A sympathetic chaperone might conveniently step out for tea at just the right moment. A more calculating aunt could freeze the room with a look and end any budding attachment with one cluck of her tongue. Historians still argue whether chaperones were more jailer or diplomat, strict enforcer or stealthy facilitator. Some certainly wielded their power like a saber. Others simply maintained appearances while quietly rooting for romance. Back in the parlor, Edward fidgets with his gloves. Aunt Margaret coughs, a warning shot. You switch topics. Have you read the Pickwick Papers? You ask sweetly. It's not exactly seductive, but at least it's not political. He nods enthusiastically. Crisis averted. You often wonder if Aunt Margaret was ever courted herself. Surely someone once admired her bustle from afar, but perhaps she was born in widow's weeds, knitting and judging from the cradle. Some chaperones were unmarried older women, but others were married mothers, elder sisters, or even paid companions whose job it was to patrol a young lady's calendar and virtue with equal ferocity. This arrangement wasn't just for women, though. Young men were also expected to behave. Showing up uninvited, lingering too long, or speaking too freely could earn you a firm rebuke. Or worse, the silent treatment from society at large. One false step, and your name might vanish from every invitation list this season. Victorian social networks were basically LinkedIn, but crueler and embroidered. And if, somehow, you managed to exchange more than 20 words and a shared appreciation for Dickens without the chaperone combusting, you might be invited to accompany the family to a public outing. This is the Holy Grail. Think gardens, museum visits, or perhaps a concert. All still very supervised, but slightly more relaxed. A chance to walk beside your intended, 3 paces apart, of course. And maybe, if fate is kind and no one's looking, brush gloves. The stakes are oddly high for such minute gestures. A glance held too long, noted. A sigh in the wrong place, discussed in the carriage ride home. Aunt Margaret will rehash the entire visit with forensic precision, from your tone of voice to Edward's shoelaces. Still, there are moments when the chaperone looks away. A fleeting second when her glasses fog from the tea or she drops a stitch. That's when eyes meet, when fingers almost touch, when something passes between you and the suitor. Something that, for just an instant, feels dangerously like connection. But it always ends the same way. A cleared throat, a raised eyebrow, a polite farewell. The parlor resets. You're back on your floral sofa, back to your needlepoint, back to being a lady in waiting, waiting for love, waiting for approval, waiting for Aunt Margaret to take a nap. And don't even think about escaping her presence at a dance. Even ballroom etiquette bends to the chaperone's will. If you're lucky enough to attend a ball, those magical evenings of music, candlelight, and carefully regulated twirling, you'll still be monitored from across the room. Chaperones line the edges like sentinels, watching every waltz, analyzing every spin. Heaven forbid your dance card fill too quickly. That's suspiciously enthusiastic. Yet even in this constant surveillance, there's room for wit. You've learned to speak in subtext, in glances, in the well-timed drop of a handkerchief. The chaperone may have the seat beside you, but your real conversation plays out in silences and stolen looks. You bid Edward farewell after an agonizingly proper 32 minutes. Aunt Margaret nods, barely. You've passed another checkpoint in the long march toward courtship. You're tired, emotionally constipated, and full of lukewarm tea, but technically still marriageable. And that's what counts. You're in the hallway, tangled in fabric and existential regret. The corset's too tight. The petticoats are bunching. And your crinoline has just wedged itself in the doorway like a wayward sailing ship. You twist sideways, try a shimmy, then finally call the maid, who delicately lifts the entire metal cage and slides you through like fine china. Ah, Victorian fashion. Equal parts beauty, torture device, and architectural marvel. Now imagine trying to flirt while dressed like a lampshade. Tonight is a small gathering, a parlor concert, nothing scandalous, but still a prime opportunity for matchmaking. You're meant to look effortless, graceful, charming, while effectively wearing a wearable tent reinforced with steel hoops. As you glide into the drawing room, careful not to knock over any side tables or unsteady relatives, you spot a few other young ladies similarly caged. Everyone's smiling politely, half strangled by their collars, and yet, even in this absurd finery, the game is afoot. Compatibility in the Victorian age wasn't about chemistry, it was about symmetry of wealth, breeding, religious denomination, and ideally, shared opinions on Queen Victoria's latest portrait. Marriage was rarely just about love. It was a transaction with romantic fringe benefits. You were expected to match not just hearts, but pocketbooks and family trees. You're introduced to Mr. Thomas Elworthy, a gentleman with a modest estate, a receding hairline, and a surprising amount to say about weather vanes. He bows. You curtsy. Well, more of a weighted dip, considering the structural demands of your skirt. He compliments your charming silhouette, which is both flattering and also entirely the result of 15 pounds of whalebone and wishful thinking. Historians still argue, you think idly, whether these garments were symbols of status or just wearable cages. Either way, you nod demurely and try not to topple a footstool with your hem. And yet, fashion was also a language, one women used strategically. A slightly lower neckline might whisper, adventurous. A new bonnet with bright ribbons might suggest liveliness. A boldly embroidered cuff. You're cultured and a bit daring. Victorian women couldn't say much outright, but they could wear their intentions, just subtly enough for society to pretend not to notice. Men weren't free from scrutiny either. That waistcoat? Too bright. Vain. That tie? Too loose. Sloppy. Too tall. Possibly predatory. Too short. Possibly French. Your Aunt Margaret says you can always trust a man whose shoes are polished, but never shiny. At the gathering, the parlor concert begins. A young woman sings something tremulous about a dying swan, and a man in the corner nearly chokes on his sherry. You try to look appreciative, but mostly you're scanning the room, evaluating prospects like a Victorian Tinder feed. No, maybe, no. Oh, he's married. Across the room, two mothers whisper, pretending not to eye their children's interactions, like military commanders planning an alliance. Behind them, a girl drops her fan in a dramatic arc, only for the intended gentleman to miss the signal entirely. Poor soul. She'll have to settle for someone who appreciates her hat, rather than her subtle, emotional Morse code. You're ushered toward the refreshments, a moment of relative freedom, where you can, for a few stolen minutes, engage in the dangerous art of unsupervised small talk. You find yourself standing beside Mr. Elworthy again. He's explaining the difference between barley and rye with academic vigor. You nod politely, while counting how many steps it would take to flee into the conservatory without tearing your hem. This is the reality of compatibility here. Not passion, but possibility. You're both in the right age range. Your families would approve. You both believe in the importance of punctuality and have all your teeth. Romance isn't built in a blaze. It's simmered gently over years, like badly seasoned stew. And there are rules. So many rules. You must never appear too eager, but not too indifferent. Too clever? Unattractive. Too quiet. Dull. You walk a tightrope between desirable and decorous, hoping your laugh lands exactly 3 notches below flirtatious and 1 above dismissive. Still, you catch moments. A comment that makes you genuinely laugh. A shared eye roll during someone's recitation of the charge of the Light Brigade. The realization that Mr. Elworthy's hairline may be retreating, but his eyes are kind. Compatibility isn't always romantic. It's often practical, cautious, built-in glances exchanged behind teacups and fans. Later that night, you finally peel off the corset with a groan of relief. It leaves an imprint on your torso, like fossilized affection. Your maid helps untangle the layers, and you wonder, again, how anyone managed to fall in love in these conditions. Fashion alone is a full-time obstacle course. Yet for all its discomforts, the dress served a purpose. It told the world who you were. It signaled your status, your style, even your seriousness. You couldn't speak your desires outright, but you could wear them. Soft sleeves for innocence, a velvet bodice for maturity, a new brooch to say, I'm open to courtship, but only if he likes opera. Still, it's hard not to feel like a walking window display. You slide into bed, every muscle sighing with relief. Outside, the wind rustles through gaslit streets. Somewhere, someone's discussing compatibility over brandy and cigars. Someone else is wondering if your smile tonight meant anything, or if it was just courtesy beneath a crinoline. You don't know. You're not even sure you know. But tomorrow is another day, another drawing room, another opportunity to be compatible, charming, polite, and slightly suffocated. Love in the Victorian age? It's slow, calculated, heavily accessorized, and somehow, despite it all, still possible. Your hands smell like roses, violets, and just a hint of dried betrayal. Because today, you're arranging a bouquet, but not just for beauty. No, this isn't a centerpiece for the dining table. It's a message. A silent, coded letter told in petals and stems. This is the language of flowers, and you're about to send what is essentially a botanical tweet to someone you've barely spoken to in full sentences. Victorians didn't just love flowers. They turned them into an entire vocabulary. It was romantic. It was mysterious. It was frankly exhausting. Every bloom held meaning. Every combination could send mixed messages faster than a modern texting mishap. A red rose? True love. Easy. But what if it's a wilted red rose? I'm losing interest. Add a marigold? Now you're implying jealousy. Throw in some basil, and the bouquet's basically hissing, I hate your cravat. You sit carefully on your window seat, arranging today's message for Mr. Elworthy. You want to say, I enjoyed our conversation. You seem thoughtful. I'm still forming an opinion, but there's no single flower for that. So you cobble together something approximating that sentiment. A few violets, modesty, white camellia, adoration, but polite, and a sprig of mint, virtue, hopefully not in an off-putting way. This is the Victorian version of flirtation, dangerously indirect and heavily perfumed. The trouble is, not everyone agrees on the meanings. One flower guide claims yellow tulips mean hopeless love. Another says cheerful thoughts. Historians still argue whether these codes were genuinely understood by most Victorians or mostly just a fun pastime for people with too much time and not enough social mobility. You wonder if Mr. Elworthy owns a flower dictionary. If he doesn't, your bouquet might be interpreted as, "Go away, I like cheese." You consider slipping a note into the petals, but that would be forward, very forward. Aunt Margaret would faint dead away and have to be revived with smelling salts and judgment. Still, floral courtship isn't limited to bouquets. Fans get involved again. You saw a girl at last week's gathering use a daisy as a makeshift signal flag, twirling it just so to say, "Come talk to me before I'm forced to discuss wallpaper with Lady Pockthorpe again." It worked? Barely. The gentleman arrived, just in time to be offered a biscuit and 3 minutes of thrilling discussion about the Queen's train delay last Thursday. You head to the market to browse blooms under your bonnet. The flower stalls are chaos. Lavender, lilacs, snapdragons, hyacinths, all fragrant, delicate, and politically charged. You overhear two ladies debating the implications of including yellow carnations in an arrangement. One insists it signals disdain. The other argues it's simply fashionable. The flower seller shrugs. They smell nice, don't they? That's the crux of the problem. Floriography, as it was called, was both a genuine cultural trend and a massive guessing game. Some books listed hundreds of floral meanings, others barely 20. And as trends changed, so did the codes. In 1845, ivy symbolized fidelity. 10 years later, it might mean let's elope. By the 1870s, people were practically sending bouquets that said, "I respect your aunt but dislike your posture." Back home, you stare at your finished bouquet, second-guessing every stem. Was that many violets too modest? Does the mint scream tepid admiration? What if Mr. Elworthy thinks you're inviting him to start a herb garden? You sigh and hand it to the maid with a note to deliver it anonymously. This, too, is part of the dance. You're not supposed to admit to anything. Just hint, suggest. Let someone else, preferably a servant, do the actual emotional labor. Later that day, a bouquet arrives for you. No note, of course. Just blooms, yellow roses, bluebells, and a single daffodil. You stare at it like a spy decoding a telegram. Yellow roses, jealousy or friendship. Bluebells, constancy or humility. Daffodil, new beginnings. Or possibly vanity, depending on the book. You call Aunt Margaret in for a second opinion. She sniffs it once and declares, "He's trying too hard," then goes back to her knitting. You place the bouquet carefully on your writing desk. It's pretty, regardless of its possibly conflicting messages. And really, maybe that's the point. The language of flowers wasn't an exact science. It was romantic guesswork, a way to communicate under 100 social rules, a channel for emotions that couldn't be said aloud without consequence. Even if meanings were muddled, the gesture mattered. Sending flowers meant you were thinking of someone. Arranging a bouquet meant you cared. And deciphering it, that was a kind of emotional detective work. It wasn't about certainty. It was about curiosity. As night falls, you pluck a violet from the bouquet and press it between the pages of your notebook. It's the only way to preserve these moments. Tomorrow, someone might send you lilies. You'll try to interpret their intentions while smiling politely and pretending you're more interested in needlework than courtship. The flower may fade, the message may blur, but the memory, that soft language of petals and potential, lingers. You wake to the smell of cigars, the faint rustle of newspapers, and the dull thump of someone tapping a walking stick against the floor for emphasis. No, you haven't been transported to a gentleman's club. You're just eavesdropping through the parlor door. Because while women navigate the delicate battlefield of handkerchief flirtation and floral subtext, the men are holding an entirely different war council, one conducted in mahogany-paneled rooms, leather chairs, and clouds of tobacco. Victorian romance is not just shaped in parlors and ballrooms. It's brokered in clubs, over brandy, and through endless chains of gossip dressed up as conversation. You press your ear closer to the door, careful not to rattle the vase. Inside, your brother and his friends are discussing the merits of a local heiress. The phrase, good ankles, but her father's in shipping, drifts through. You sigh. So much for romance. Gentlemen's clubs are the unofficial matchmaking hubs for the upper class. They're not romantic, not glamorous. In fact, they often smell like old boots and overcooked meat. But they hold enormous social sway. Here, potential suitors swap information. Dowries, family reputations, who fainted at a music hall, who rides too enthusiastically, and who has a suspicious number of cats. It's part old boys network, part surveillance operation. These clubs aren't all the same. There's the Reform Club for the politically minded, the Garrick for artsy types, Whites for those with too much money and not enough humility. If your suitor belongs to more than one, he's probably either very popular or very bored. Either way, you're likely being discussed between mouthfuls of game pie and deeply sexist punchlines. Meanwhile, back in your world, the same information trickles through drawing rooms at a much higher pitch. The ladies' gossip network is no less powerful, just more floral and served with scones. Here, reputations are made and unmade over teacups. It's not unusual for a courtship to rise or collapse entirely based on what someone's cousin's neighbor once overheard during a carriage ride. You sit beside Aunt Margaret as she leafs through her newspaper with surgical precision. "Ah," she says, tapping a headline. "Mr. Elworthy's cousin has been fined for excessive carriage speeding. Do keep that in mind." This is what you're up against. Love filtered through public opinion, class speculation, and the occasional minor legal infraction. One misplaced word in the gossip mill, and your perfectly arranged courtship becomes radioactive. And make no mistake, gossip moves fast. Faster than carriages. Faster than reason. Someone sneezes in front of the wrong person, and by the end of the week, they're rumored to be consumptive, scandalous, or, worst of all, interested in amateur theater. Historians still argue whether this Victorian obsession with reputation was driven by genuine moral concern or just a desperate need for social control. Either way, it shaped everything. Who could call? Who could write? Who could walk beside whom? And for how long? Courtship was less about two people liking each other and more about convincing everyone else they were appropriate. Still, some suitors learned to work the system. A well-placed compliment here, a timely charitable donation there. Soon, they're the toast of the season. You recall last year's most eligible bachelor, Lord P. something, the one with the dazzling smile and suspiciously vague background. For weeks, he was everywhere, every dance card, every luncheon. And then, just as suddenly, poof. Whispers of gambling debts and a secret marriage to a Belgian opera singer ended his run faster than a collapsed soufflé. The gossip chain is ruthless, but not always wrong. It acts as a kind of background check, crowd-sourced and constantly updated. You just have to hope you don't get caught in the crossfire. Or worse, become the subject of it. You get your first taste when your maid shyly mentions that someone in the market overheard a vendor say your gloves were noticeably threadbare. Aunt Margaret is scandalized. "We must correct this immediately," she says, ordering 3 new pairs within the hour. Forget romantic intrigue. Your gloves could make or break your chances. But gossip isn't all destruction. Sometimes it builds alliances. A friendly nod from the right dowager, a compliment passed along through mutual acquaintances. These can boost your standing overnight. Aunt Margaret makes it her mission to seed positive narratives wherever possible. Mention you play piano, she instructs, before every social event. Say nothing of the beekeeping. You wonder sometimes if any of this is real, if anyone is falling in love, or if they're just falling into favorable opinion. But then you catch a quiet moment, 2 people laughing a little too sincerely over tea, a hand that lingers just slightly past propriety, a glance exchanged under the pretense of discussing the weather. That's where the truth lives. Not in the gossip, not in the papers, not even in the club lounges, in those small, unsupervised sparks. You just have to protect them. So you sit up straighter. You smooth your gloves. You rehearse a witty line about violas that's just clever enough to be memorable, but not so clever it feels rehearsed. Because tonight, you're going to a gathering where Mr. Elworthy will be present, and you intend to keep your name on the right lips. After all, love may be whispered in gardens and scribbled in secret notes, but in Victorian society, it's made, then unmade, over brandy and biscuits. You stare at the envelope in your hand, like it might detonate. Creamy parchment, no seal, delicately pressed, clearly sent by someone with good paper taste and better intentions. It arrived discreetly, slipped beneath the door, tucked between the morning's mail and a circular about improved chimney brushes. You recognize the handwriting, Mr. Elworthy's, which is both thrilling and slightly illegal, because technically, you're not supposed to be exchanging letters. Not yet. In Victorian courtship, correspondence is serious business. A letter isn't just a letter. It's a declaration, an escalation, and potentially a scandal, all rolled into one folded piece of paper. The right words could nudge a courtship forward. The wrong ones, catastrophe. There are families who have never recovered from an unsanctioned semicolon. Still, you crack the waxless flap and unfold the paper, eyes scanning the ink with cautious excitement. It's short, polite, effusive but restrained. The kind of message that says, "I'm thinking of you," without ever saying the word "you" more than once. He compliments your floral arrangement. So he did get the mint reference, thank heaven. He mentions an upcoming garden party and hopes, without explicitly inviting, you might be there. He signs it simply, yours, in modest admiration. You stare at it again. A letter is so intimate, so unfiltered. No chaperone to interject. No drawing room full of eyes. Just one person's thoughts. Edited, of course, but still theirs. The very act of writing can feel like peeling off a glove, which is to say, wildly inappropriate. Aunt Margaret is already aware. Of course. She eyes the envelope from across the room like it's harboring cholera. If you must reply, she says with a sniff, use the finest stationery, and don't sign your name too clearly. Ink lingers longer than reputations. And so begins the letter-writing phase. You select your paper with the care of a general choosing battle flags, pale blue, no flowers, subtly embossed. You begin with the obligatory pleasantries. The weather has been unusually amiable. Then ease into a paragraph about his observations on rosemary symbolism, bold, and close with a comment on a mutual acquaintance's affinity for overwatering petunias. You fold it once, not twice. Twice implies business. Seal it with wax, but not with your personal signet. That's for family letters. Then you hand it to the maid with strict instructions. No detours, no commentary, no eye contact with the butler who will receive it. Because, as everyone knows, the real postmen of love are servants with excellent memories and terrible impulse control. Now, the waiting. You occupy yourself with needlepoint, reading, and pretending not to check the window every 10 minutes. By afternoon, a reply arrives. The timing is suspiciously swift. He must have penned it immediately after reading yours. You smile without meaning to. Dangerous. His next note is longer. Still proper. Still avoiding anything as damning as feelings. But there's warmth in the margins. A joke about bees. A reference to your shared disdain for dried lavender sachets. He closes with a question. Do you prefer Blake or Wordsworth? And now, you're in it deep. Because letter exchanges, in this world, are a relationship. They're a dialogue without interruptions, a courtship of the mind. And for many, this was where real affection bloomed. You can reveal things in ink that you couldn't whisper in person. No audience, no chaperone, just thoughts. Historians still argue whether these letter-driven romances were more genuine than face-to-face courtship. There's plenty of evidence that long correspondence fostered deeper emotional intimacy. But others argue it created idealized versions of people, falling in love with a voice on paper, not the human behind it. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps that's what makes it so powerful and so risky. Because letters can be intercepted, they can be misread, they can be shared. One ill-timed note, left out on a writing desk, and suddenly your heartfelt comment about Wordsworth's melancholia is the talk of 5 tea circles and a gardening club. And then there's the other danger. When letters turn into something bolder. You hear whispers of couples who've exchanged full volumes of poetry, private sketches, even pressed flowers with heavily coded meanings. Some add initials. One scandalized pair reportedly exchanged hair. That's right, hair. A locket, a curl, a whisper of scandal snipped and sealed. Aunt Margaret once declared this barbaric and barely distinguishable from witchcraft. You begin drafting your 4th reply when you realize you're smiling before the pen even touches the page. That's when it hits you. This has gone beyond strategy. You want to write to him, not just for appearance, not just for matchmaking, but because you look forward to his voice, even on paper. This is dangerous territory. You take extra care now, testing phrases aloud before committing them to ink. You want to sound thoughtful, but not rehearsed. Warm, but not suggestive. You debate over commas like they're court testimony. You spend 20 minutes deciding if fond is too much and if admiring is too little. Welcome to Victorian vulnerability. But still, you write, you send, you wait. And late that night, when the house is quiet and the gas lamps flicker in their glass cages, you take out his first letter, just to reread, just to remember the tone, just to feel seen. Not heard, not yet. That will come later. For now, you're just ink and paper, hope and hesitation. And in the soft rustle of each envelope, love begins to breathe. The pianoforte is off key. The lemonade is flat. And you've been offered 3 slices of seed cake by a man whose conversational skills could be replaced by a decorative fern. Yes, it's time for a garden party But not just any garden party. This one, hosted by the Lorimers, is the event of the month, known for its excellent gazebo placement and unusually aggressive badminton. More importantly, you've heard a certain Mr. Elworthy will be in attendance, which means this entire day is less about cucumber sandwiches and more about strategic loitering. You arrive in your best soft blue muslin with embroidered violets, tasteful, modest, and just eye-catching enough to make a certain gentleman swallow his syllables mid-sentence. The garden is blooming with late spring roses and buzzing with polite chaos. Parasols dot the lawn like pastel mushrooms. Somewhere, someone is tuning a harp with the commitment of a man fighting for his life. Aunt Margaret has already secured a shaded seat with full view of the croquet pitch. You are expected to mingle, gracefully, of course. No bounding, no flapping, no sweat, if possible. The pressure to appear effortlessly charming while slowly roasting under 3 layers of linen and lace, immense. But you persevere. Because garden parties, for all their frilly absurdity, are prime courtship territory. They provide the rarest of Victorian luxuries, semi-unsupervised mingling. Outdoors, the rules are a touch looser. The shrubbery provides modest visual barriers. There are games, casual walking, social drift. It's possible to have a 5-minute conversation without a chaperone wedged into your shadow. You spot Mr. Elworthy near the lemonade stand, engaged in a polite debate about hedge topiary. You drift over, aided by the world's most casual coincidence, and are rewarded with a small smile and the ever-thrilling question, would you care for a stroll? Now, in any other era, this would be nothing. But in Victorian England, a walk, a sanctioned promenade no less, is a milestone. It means trust. It means recognition. It means, very possibly, someone's aunt signed off on this the night before. You accept. Naturally. The gravel path crunches beneath your feet as you move side by side. Him with hands behind his back, you with gloved fingertips just grazing your parasol. You talk about the weather. Sunny, with a risk of impropriety. The flowers. Impressive, but not as impressive as decoding your bouquet last week. And the latest serialized novel. He's firmly pro-Dickens, though you suspect he secretly prefers the Brontes. There are moments, small ones, when his hand swings just a little too close, when your laugh lasts a heartbeat too long, when he says your name in a way that feels unchaperoned, and yet, always, the rules hover. Your walk loops back toward the main lawn before the 10-minute mark. Any longer, and people might start to whisper. Someone's aunt will start fanning herself with moral concern. You part ways with a nod, a gentle smile, and the terrifying awareness that everything went perfectly, and yet, absolutely nothing was said. This is the agony and art of the Victorian garden party. It's full of near misses, of things unsaid, of hope blooming right under society's trimmed hedges. You return to the refreshment table and are instantly cornered by Mrs. Avery, who asks if Mr. Elworthy seemed rather fond of you. You give the only correct answer, a smile, a head tilt, and a sip of lukewarm lemonade. You know better than to confirm anything, because one wrong word, and this day, this walk, this budding attachment could turn into gossip fodder by nightfall. That's the risk of public courtship. It's like playing chess on a glass table. Everyone sees your every move, and half the pieces are secretly judging you. Still, you play the game. You join a game of croquet, your hat artfully tilted, your mallet strikes more symbolic than strategic. Mr. Elworthy watches from across the lawn, Someone misses a shot. Someone else trips over a hoop. You manage a graceful victory, which impresses no one except a very elderly pug. As the sun begins to dip, the party winds down. Reticules are gathered. Gloves are refitted. Social bets are quietly tallied. Did anyone scandalize anyone? Did any gentleman linger too long? Were there handshakes with feeling? You board the carriage home with your cheeks aching from polite smiling, and your mind buzzing from the memory of a walk that on paper said nothing, and yet somehow said everything. Historians still argue whether garden parties genuinely fostered relationships or just provided a socially acceptable stage for rehearsal. Certainly, the performances were elaborate, but underneath all the lace, lemonade, and lawn games, real feelings sometimes managed to peek through. Tentatively, carefully, almost accidentally. That night, you find a pressed forget-me-not tucked into your reticule. You don't remember picking it, but you do remember brushing against a flower bed near the arbor and someone's hand lingering near yours. Coincidence? Maybe. But in Victorian courtship, even coincidence has good handwriting. You're on your best behavior, and by that, you mean you're wearing your best gloves, sitting in a room that smells like starch and sermons, while trying not to sneeze on the vicar. Welcome to church courting, Victorian style. You've heard it said before. The couple that pews together, brews together, or something like that. Because if there's one place where a courtship can gain either divine momentum or an abrupt death, it's here, between the hymnal and the judgmental cough of a nearby spinster. You adjust your bonnet. Not too far back. That screams vanity. Not too far forward. Too shy. You're seated beside your family, of course. No wandering pew choices allowed. But you already know Mr. Elworthy sits 3 rows up and 1 to the left. Close enough to glance, without risking eternal damnation. The organ begins. You stand, sing, and try to remember whether Gladly, the cross-eyed bear, is the one with that unfortunate high note. You sneak a glance during the reading of Corinthians. He's reading too. Or pretending. His jawline is resolutely pious. You wonder what he's thinking. Probably about predestination. Or your embroidered cuffs. Now, church in Victorian society isn't just about spiritual nourishment. It's also a social stage. Strictly PG, spiritually supervised, and absolutely brimming with hidden subplots. Sunday best isn't just about cleanliness. It's a showcase of class, discipline, and subtle marital availability. Those pews, hotbeds of polite observation, and afterward, the after-church walk. This, right here, is where the real negotiations begin. Once the final hymn echoes out and everyone files into the graveyard-adjacent lawn, courtship accelerates. Families mingle, eyes are cast, conversations begin gently, often steered by matriarchs with suspiciously good hearing. Aunt Margaret sidles over, her parasol acting less as sun protection and more as a conversational prod. "Look," she murmurs, "he's wearing dove gray. That's a serious coat. The kind worn by a man who owns land and is considering offspring. You're not sure that's universally true, but you appreciate her commitment to textile psychology." Mr. Elworthy approaches with a deferential nod to your aunt. He offers his arm, with witnesses present, mind you, for the short walk to the road. The moment is thrilling and also blindingly proper. Your gloves brush his sleeve. That's practically flirtation with vowels. You talk about the sermon. You both agree the bishop's metaphors about sheep were vivid, if a little emotionally intrusive. You comment on the flower arrangements. He chuckles when you suggest the lilies looked slightly alarmed. It's all so minor, so carefully staged, and yet your heart insists on treating it like a sonnet. Because church, paradoxically, allows for closeness within restraint. No one expects declarations. But if a gentleman returns week after week, always taking the same route home, always managing to arrive just as your family exits the vestibule, it starts to look like intent. And intent, in Victorian dating, is practically foreplay. Historians still argue whether church courting was genuinely romantic or merely the most convenient method for matchmaking under God's watchful and judgmental eye. Some claim it encouraged sincerity. Others call it spiritual window dressing. But the truth likely lies somewhere in the creaky wooden pews between. You make it to the road without tripping. Success. Mr. Elworthy compliments the lace on your sleeve. You pretend not to notice the way your brother immediately takes mental notes for teasing. Aunt Margaret announces that the breeze is turning rude. And you all part ways in a flurry of bonnets and farewells. Back at home, you find yourself humming the offertory hymn while brushing your hair. That's suspicious. You usually reserve that sort of post-church enthusiasm for roast beef. But today felt different. Not monumental, just quietly meaningful. Like something almost happened, but also didn't. That's Victorian church courtship for you. Nothing dramatic, but everything charged. All emotion wrapped in civility, all affection hidden in proper phrasing and acceptable elbow distance. It's like trying to fall in love inside a library, under supervision, with limited movement, and while avoiding the wrath of anyone over 60. Still, it works. Plenty of couples meet this way. Church is, after all, reliable, respectable, God-approved. And if a suitor consistently shows up, sings in tune, and manages not to nod off during the homily, that's practically a marriage proposal. You glance at the clock. Just past 4. Too early for a letter, too late for a walk. But maybe, just maybe, he's thinking of you too. Somewhere between Psalm 23 and the faint scent of hymn book ink. The bells ring again in the distance, tolling softly over rooftops and rose gardens. A reminder that next Sunday, you'll both be back in your seats. 3 rows apart, 1 step closer. You are sitting stiffly on a small, understuffed chair, facing a man who looks alarmingly like a hawk in spectacles. To your left is a 3-tiered tray of tea cakes. To your right, Mr. Elworthy is quietly drowning in his own awkwardness. Congratulations. You've reached the family visit phase. This is no longer casual. This is intentional. When a gentleman calls at your home to pay his respects in the presence of your entire bloodline, the stakes are no longer subtle. This is courtship with furniture placement. Your mother has polished every surface to a military gleam. Your sister has mysteriously appeared in her second-best dress and is pretending to read the Book of Common Prayer. And Aunt Margaret, she's sitting in her designated interrogation armchair, sipping lukewarm tea with the air of a woman who has ended engagements for less than a weak handshake. Mr. Elworthy is prepared. He compliments the wallpaper. He asks about your father's gout with just the right balance of concern and neutrality. He comments, bravely, on the hydrangeas. Aunt Margaret raises an eyebrow, but does not hiss. This is going well. Until, of course, it's your turn to speak. You try for casual. You ask about his latest letter to the papers regarding railway safety. Yes, he's that sort of gentleman. He responds politely, somewhere between the words station master protocol and braking mechanism. You realize that your mother has not blinked in 4 full minutes. These visits are tests of wit, of breeding, of social choreography. A family call is like a polite duel. You must appear genuine, modest, charming, and completely unaware that your future may be hinging on how you butter your scone. You excuse yourself briefly to refill the tea, allegedly, and in the kitchen, you breathe out the pressure. These visits are no one's favorite. Even in the most successful matches, they leave emotional debris. Did you talk too much? Too little? Did your brother make that joke about hay prices again? Did your dog behave? Did your family behave? Historians still argue whether these formal family visits were truly about emotional compatibility, or just ways for families to appraise one another like rival estates. Certainly, the social function was clear. Weigh reputations. Examine manners. Scan for hidden debts and unspoken eccentricities. You re-enter with a fresh pot of tea and witness a miracle. Mr. Elworthy is laughing with Aunt Margaret. She has told one of her infamous Devonshire vicar stories, and he is genuinely amused. He even wipes a tear from the corner of his eye. She's not smiling, but she's clearly assessing him with less suspicion. That's as close to approval as anyone gets. Later, he glances your way. It's a look, brief, subtle, but filled with relief. He survived. The visit ends with polite bows, soft handshakes, and your mother making vague references to a summer garden luncheon that may or may not actually exist. Mr. Elworthy promises to write soon. You believe him. Once the door closes, the entire family seems to breathe in reverse. Your mother begins her post-mortem. Well-spoken, upright posture, not overly fixated on his own accomplishments. Your sister chirps, "He called the parlor wallpaper refreshing." Aunt Margaret says nothing, just nods once and returns to her knitting like a Roman senator who has quietly acquitted a defendant. That night, you replay it all. The careful phrasing, the way he passed you the sugar bowl without spilling judgment, the glimmer of connection behind the polite small talk. You suspect that if he had been rude, arrogant, or insufficiently reverent about marmalade, the entire possibility would have been quietly buried under layers of etiquette. These visits matter because they're real. There's no lace curtain to hide behind, no garden arbor for soft lighting. It's two people navigating each other's tribes. No matter how modern or rebellious the heart may feel, love in this time still needs the blessing of the drawing room. You glance at your writing desk. You could draft a thank you note. Nothing too revealing. Just appreciation for a pleasant afternoon. Maybe a mention of hydrangeas. But then again, he promised he'd write next. Let him. Let him want to. Outside, the wind is shifting. Somewhere in the house, someone's oil lamp sputters. Your teacup is still warm in your hands. The visit is over. But the courtship? It's beginning to breathe on its own. It starts with lace. A swatch of delicate cream, pinned inside a hat box beside velvet ribbons and pearl-tipped pins. It's not for you. Not yet. But for the family heirloom veil that's being aired out, as if it too is preparing for possibility. This is the bridal phase, still hypothetical, still unspoken, but moving forward like an anxious carriage down a cobblestone lane. Nothing official has been declared. No banns read, no ring shopped. But there's a tension in the air now, a thick, perfumed anticipation. The mood in the house has shifted. Your mother lingers at your door with increasing regularity, asking questions that sound innocent but are anything but. Do you like lavender for table arrangements? She muses. If you had to choose between duck or lamb at a large luncheon, which feels more welcoming? You mumble something about mutton being politically neutral and shut the door before she opens the topic of monogrammed linen. Aunt Margaret, meanwhile, is in full spectral form. She floats from room to room, muttering tales of engagements gone wrong. The bride who wore lemon and was summarily abandoned. The groom who proposed without a second waistcoat. Every story ends the same. And so she had to move to Bath. You, however, are trying not to spiral, because while all signs point to a proposal on the horizon, nothing is certain. You're still caught in that strange, suspended space between assumption and declaration. Victorian proposals are not romantic surprises. They are planned with the precision of military campaigns. Conversations are held before the question is popped. Fathers speak to suitors. Dowries are negotiated. Schedules are aligned. There is a window for surprise, yes, but it's often tiny and flanked by legal documents. One evening, your father receives a letter. He reads it slowly, with the careful pace of a man opening something that might contain either a formal offer or an unexpected investment opportunity. You sit nearby, pretending to embroider, though your needle hasn't moved in 10 minutes. He folds the paper, clears his throat. Mr. Elworthy, he says, wishes to speak with me tomorrow. That's it. That's the moment. Not a violin swell. Not a declaration in the rain. Just a man requesting a conversation. And yet your heart is sprinting like it's being chased by creditors. Historians still argue whether Victorian proposals were truly romantic affairs or simply logistical formalities wrapped in velvet. Some letters from the time are undeniably passionate. Others read like business memos. It's possible the real romance lived not in the proposal itself, but in the slow, hesitant buildup. The gaze held a second too long. The pressed flower sent without a signature. The way your name sounded slightly different in someone's mouth. The next morning is unbearable. The clock ticks louder than usual. The hall smells like lavender oil and starch. You try to distract yourself with needlework, then reading, then reorganizing your hairpins by size. When Mr. Elworthy arrives, you don't see him, not right away. He's ushered into your father's study, where the door closes with a gentle, destiny-flavored click. You sit like a statue for the next 25 minutes, your mind cycling through every possible outcome: acceptance, delay, horror, spontaneous elopement. Your father challenging him to a duel over a misunderstood sheep reference. Then the door opens. Your father emerges, clears his throat again. He really enjoys this maneuver, and says, simply, he'll speak with you now. That's it. No bells, no proclamations, just permission. You step into the study. Mr. Elworthy stands. He looks suddenly very human, a bit nervous, a bit proud. He gestures toward the seat across from him, but you remain standing, hands clasped. I hope, he begins, you'll forgive the formality. You nod. I believe we are compatible, he says gently, and I think we could be happy. You smile, nervous and delighted, and still holding your breath. I would be honored, he says at last, to call you my wife. It's not poetry. It's not particularly spontaneous, but it is honest. You reply, not with a squeal or swoon, but with a quiet, steady yes. The kind of yes that knows exactly what it's saying. And when he smiles, relieved, overwhelmed, visibly moved, it feels less like the end of something and more like the opening scene to the next part of the play. Later, your mother will cry, quietly, into a handkerchief monogrammed in 3 hopeful letters. Your sister will demand to know everything, despite having heard it all from the keyhole. Aunt Margaret will raise a glass of elderflower cordial and pronounce, well, at least he didn't wear yellow. And you? You'll sit beside the window, reading over a new letter from Mr. Elworthy, still unsigned, still cautious, still entirely dear, and feel the first threads of a life slowly being stitched together. No rings yet, no announcements, just lace, and a future unfolding gently, like a ribbon tugged from its knot. The lace is out. The guest list is growing like mold, and your mother has developed an unsettling obsession with napkin folds. Welcome to Wedding Planning, Victorian edition. You've said yes. Families have nodded, grunted, or, if you're lucky, exchanged handwritten blessings. Now comes the phase that makes courtship look like a walk through a perfume meadow, preparing the wedding. It's part theater, part logistics, and entirely designed to display both your virtue and your family's ability to manage poultry. The first thing decided is the date. You suggest a quiet May ceremony. Your mother recoils like you just proposed eloping with a chimney sweep. May? She gasps. Everyone knows that's unlucky. You'll be sweeping sorrow from the hearth until the Jubilee. So June it is. Respectable. Warm, but not sultry. Excellent for garden photos you'll never see again. Next, the dress. Not white, not necessarily. That trend only becomes dominant after Queen Victoria's own wedding in 1840, and even then, it's not universal. Ivory is respectable. Pale blue whispers virtue. You try on 14 versions of both, while your sister gives unsolicited opinions from the chaise like a judgmental duchess. Eventually, a seamstress arrives to pin fabric to your trembling torso while declaring your shoulder-to-waist ratio pleasingly biblical. And the veil, heavy, embroidered, imbued with emotional weight that could sink a fishing boat. Aunt Margaret insists on using the family veil. Last seen in 1813 and still scented faintly of mothballs and regret. Then there's the guest list. At first, it's 50, then 75. Then your father remembers his cousin in Suffolk with 17 children and one operatic laugh. Now, you're at 92, and that's before the vicar announces that 3 local parishioners must be included for appearances. Your fiancé, you can call him that now, well, in front of family, is cheerfully overwhelmed. He offers to help. You hand him the seating chart and tell him to figure out how to keep Aunt Louisa and Colonel Pembroke at least 10 feet apart due to the Madeira incident. He turns pale, but nods like a man headed into battle. You've now entered the stage where everything is symbolic. Flowers? They all have meanings. Orange blossoms for purity, myrtle for love. Roses, only the correct shade, of course, for passion restrained by social acceptability. You mention including lavender and are informed it might imply distrust. Lavender, the most polite herb in England. You switch to peonies and pray no one thinks you're referencing greed. The cake is fruit because it has to be. Dense, sculpted, and likely to survive minor sieges. Covered in royal icing so thick you could use it as masonry. You take one bite during the tasting and vow to never eat again. And let's not forget the trousseau, a collection of garments and linens designed to prove that you can manage a household and embroider small birds onto undergarments, chemises, stockings, petticoats, monogrammed towels, entire drawers of hopeful domesticity. You fold and refold the lot until your fingers feel stitched shut. Meanwhile, the whispers begin. Guests speculate about the honeymoon location. A seaside town? Paris? A respectable cottage with lukewarm tea? Neighbors comment on the number of carriages expected. A widow down the street offers you a book of poems she once received as a wedding gift, filled with lines about eternal devotion and surprisingly graphic references to harvest metaphors. Historians still argue whether Victorian wedding preparations were truly about celebrating love or just elaborate performances of propriety. Some brides felt suffocated. Others took joy in every paper flower and pressed glass button. Most likely, it was a bit of both. A joyful pageant stitched together with anxious lace. Amid all this, you find quiet moments. An early morning walk where the roses bloom just a little brighter than expected. A letter from your fiancé, folded and refolded until the corners soften, filled with gentle affirmations and an inquiry about whether you prefer currants or apricots in scones. You reply with a sketch of a teacup and a subtle heart in the corner. He'll notice. One evening, you find him in the garden, helping your father trim back the laurel hedge. They don't talk much. Men never do when holding sharp tools. But they move in sync, two halves of something beginning to align. And you, watching from the window, realize you're not just preparing for a wedding. You're preparing for a life. Not a perfect one, not a fairy tale, but one with hope and tea and shared glances across the breakfast table. And maybe, just maybe, love that doesn't need flowers to speak. The final dress fitting goes well. The weather looks promising. The invitations are sealed with more wax than any household requires. And in your jewelry box, a small gold ring waits. Plain, lovely, exactly your size. Soon it will be yours. The morning arrives with the softness of a lullaby, light slanting through lace curtains, footsteps muffled by polished floors, and the kind of silence that hums with meaning. You wake not to fanfare or trumpets, but to the whisper of fabric being pressed and the unmistakable scent of lavender water. It's your wedding day. You lie still for a moment, eyes open, breathing in the fact that this is it. The world hasn't transformed. The bed is the same. The ceiling still slightly cracked. But you are standing on the cusp of something entirely new, and nothing about that feels ordinary. Breakfast is brought to your room. Toast, lightly buttered. Tea, just as you like it. You barely taste any of it. Everything is strangely suspended in syrup. Slower, softer, like the hours themselves are treading gently so as not to break the spell. Downstairs, preparations thrum like a hive. Guests begin to arrive. Servants shuffle with nervous purpose. Aunt Margaret is heard ordering someone to reposition the lilies. They look like mourners. You smile despite yourself. The dress hangs on the screen, pale ivory, tiny buttons trailing like pearls down the back. You step into it with careful breaths as your maid fastens each loop. The fabric is heavier than you remember. Not oppressive, just real. The weight of intention, the gravity of this moment, tailored into sleeves. You glance at your reflection. You don't look different, not exactly, but there's a stillness around your face, a steadiness in your eyes, as if the months of notes, glances, and hesitant walks have settled into something calm and certain. The veil is pinned, the gloves drawn on. The shoes, delicate satin, barely scuffed, slide into place. And suddenly, it's time. The ceremony is held in the village church, where the same pew once witnessed your early courtship, and the same hymn book still bears faded pencil scribbles from decades past. There's something soothing in that continuity, even as everything changes. You arrive on your father's arm. The air inside is cool and quiet. Mr. Elworthy stands near the altar, looking equally composed and slightly stunned. He bows his head as you approach, not just polite, but reverent, as though he's seeing something sacred. The service begins. There are vows. You speak them clearly, though your voice wavers on to cherish. There's a ring, smooth, warm from his pocket. It slides onto your finger with perfect fit, like it knew its destination all along. The vicar pronounces you wed. There's a hush, then polite applause, a cough, the sound of your mother exhaling for the first time in 10 minutes. The reception is held in the garden, under bunting your sister stitched by hand, and between tables dressed in lace and too many forks. Guests sip lemonade. Someone sings. There's cake, dense of course, and a toast so long it passes through multiple themes. You sneak away mid-afternoon with your husband, to walk beneath the arbor where he first complimented your gloves. He takes your hand. You're very calm, he says. You smile. I've been practicing. The afternoon fades. Guests depart in a blur of carriage wheels and tulle. The house empties. You change into a traveling dress and accept a bouquet wrapped in ribbon, already drying at the edges. There's a final wave from Aunt Margaret, her eyes suspiciously damp, and then the carriage door closes. Inside, it's quiet again. The clatter of hooves, the smell of lilac, his hand resting gently over yours. You lean back, let your head settle against the cushion, and for the first time all day, breathe out completely. You made it. No fainting. No misplaced vows. No last-minute objections from mysterious cousins. Just a beginning. The carriage hums forward, wheels turning gently beneath you. The evening air slips in through the narrow window, cool and forgiving. The world outside is dimming, lanterns flickering to life, leaves rustling softly overhead, the last blush of sun stretching across hedgerows and fields. Inside, everything is slow now. Your hands are ungloved. Your shoes rest by your side. The silence between you and him is comfortable, easy. No more rehearsals. No more embroidery pinned with nerves. The day, so long in coming, is behind you now. Each moment, folded neatly away like the dress that brought you down the aisle. The congratulations, the speeches, the flutter of veil and vow. They drift through your memory like rose petals on a warm wind. You think back to the beginning, to dances and deciphered bouquets, to awkward tea visits and letters that lingered in your hands just a little too long. Each step, a soft thread, tugging you toward this stillness, this peace. Outside, the stars blink into place, one by one, quietly, confidently. You rest your head against the padded corner of the carriage and close your eyes. The gentle rock of the road, the rhythmic clop of the horses, the low whisper of your husband's voice, humming an unfamiliar tune. They wrap around you like a lullaby spun from hope and rain and distant bells. There's no need to worry now. The path is chosen, the promise made. And as the countryside drifts past and the last candlelight fades behind you, you let go of tension, of planning, of propriety, and let the soft rhythm of love carry you forward, into rest, into dreams, into something truly your own.